everybody, we are back. We're back on track, and we're going to show now the next stage, which is the sketching process. For that, obviously, my best friends, lovely pencil, Milan eraser, and the ruler. The ruler comes really handy because now that you know the scale that you're working, you're going to be able to at all times calculate whether whatever you're doing is proportionate or not. I'll give you an idea. So obviously you know now that the width of the garden is 10 meters, but what if I wanted to draw a path in it? Right, imagine I have a little page prepared there so that I can bring it to your to the camera. Imagine that I am in my unskilled mind, I draw a path like that, thinking that that looks fabulous and all that, but I don't know the width of that. I'm just doing it by eye. Or is my path, does it need to be as wide as that? Well, that's where I get my wonderful friend here. So in the first path, the width of it is barely 50 centimeters. Whereas on the second one, you're giving it 1.5 meters. So always have the ruler ready to measure and to be able to be proportionate rather than just drawing random things. Right, that said, the next stage is the most important part of the whole design process. Why? Well, this is the stage where your ideas come, your thoughts, you have your wish list from the client, which is actually nice if you were to write it down here on the side, so that whatever you do on the page kind of matches what your client wants. But the first thing I want to do, and it's going to be roughly, okay, you don't have to be terribly a perfectionist at this stage, but I do remember that roughly around that area my neighbor has some sort of a shed, so that means that the roof of it is not going to be very nice from there. So I'm going to need that in here to remember to put some sort of a planting on that side so that my client doesn't look at that roof. I also do remember that there were a couple of trees, and you can go on Google Maps to prove that. Those two trees are going to give me a little bit of shade in around here. So again, that area would either become shade-loving plants or maybe compost area or something where I'm not wasting a sunny position for something else, yeah? And the field at the back is nice and whatever, so I don't need to be worrying about blocking the views in that section. And then the neighbor there, just I think they have a tree or so on that side, so there's nothing I need to worry on that side in relation to views. So I'm going to write down my client's wish list. So in my client's wish list, number 1, they want 2 patios. Okay, 2 patio areas, and one needs to be near the house, another one needs to be somewhere else in the garden, and it be smaller. So the 2 patios, one big, one small. The second thing they want is a defined lawn with a defined shape. They are open to what that shape would be, and they are not too sure whether they like formal or informal, because this is a couple. So the lady of the house likes the formal setting, whereas the her husband has indicated that he loves natural lines and informal. So I'm gonna have to figure out a way of pleasing both of them somehow, compromise. Okay, you become a bit of a couples counselor sometimes when you are a garden designer, so you have to be very tactful as well. But your design, nevertheless, it needs to make sense. It needs to actually deliver the principles of design. So in fact, I'm going to make that point here. I was going to call it number 4, but I've changed my mind. I'm going to call it zero, as in even before you start, principles of design, because it's more important, the principles, okay, of design. Now, of course, you know that that means balance, unity, form, proportion, all of that. You can look at that on lesson 1. My client also wants, obviously, a certain amount of flower beds and planting material, and they want seasons to be obvious. Seasonality, meaning that when they're sitting in their patio area, it is obvious that it's either springtime, or summertime, or autumn, or winter. So the garden needs to change. It needs to change. This is a challenge from the point of view of the plant knowledge. Okay, so it needs to change. Practicalities, well, manhole needs to be taken into account. What am I going to do with the manhole? The clothesline, I'm going to use this space here now. Clothes, they do want to put the clothes out in the air, but they don't want to see those clothes when they're actually barbecuing, whatever not. So clothesline, they must be sort of hidden away. We're going to have also an area for the bins, and again, it needs to be sort of tucked away, hidden, cannot be too obvious. And then after that, what else do they want? They want to be able to go to the shed without having to walk on the lawn, namely a path. Right, well, I have just described the most common circumstances when it comes to a garden design, what you're quite likely to get from your clients. That's their wish list. You're quite likely to get that wish list. So I'm going to start now with the sketching process, taking those into account. And I always start with creating some sort of a zone. I want to zone the areas. What I mean by zoning is that I have to determine how much of my garden is going to be lawn and how much is going to be patio. And I know there's going to be 2 patios anyway. So as a general rule, your lawn should be bigger. 2 times, maybe it should be like 1/3 of the general size, whereas the patio areas would be that's 1/3. If the lawn is 1/3 of the total area, the patio would be, in my maths, that would be way smaller than that. So I'm gonna say like could be like the other part would be like the 0.5 of the whole thing. What I'm trying to say is that the lawn is bigger. Okay, so I'm going to erase that. Ignore. It's not in thirds. I'm going to do it as in percentages. The lawn should come up to approximately 70% of the garden, whereas the patio should be something like 20, and the remaining 10 could be planting space or whatever. Okay, sorry about that. Now, because my client has a long and narrow garden, I just want them to get the impression that it is wider than narrow. So to do that, I'm going to make that the lawn area doesn't go all the way to the shed, and it doesn't start all the way around the patio. So I'm going to get the central area of this space as the lawn, so that the shape of it would be more kind of squarey rather than a long rectangle. And then whatever I do at both sides, it's going to introduce the whatever shape of the first patio, second patio, and some sort of a path that brings me around there. So now I have zones. a zone of roughly, and I'm doing light lines, but I'm going to do them a little bit harder for you to actually see, okay? But normally I would just do it very light. That zone is my lawn. That zone is patio number 2. That zone is patio number 1. And now I can start shaping. So to start shaping, you would have to allow me to erase those 2 lines. And you're very lucky because I'm speaking out loud here. I'm sharing with you exactly what goes through my mind when I'm sketching. And I don't know any designer that actually exposes that. I do, because I think it's important for your learning. Based on the fact that the manhole is there and I don't want to cause extra money or whatever, I'm going to try my very best to get my patio as far as here, not further. Also, based on the fact that the client is kind of formal, informal, I'm going to try and create a patio that has a little bit of straight lines, but also a bit of a mixture, like a bit of curved line. And in my mind, it seems to me that this area could potentially be the best area for both the clothesline and the bins, because obviously they don't want to be seeing any of that here. And of course, you don't want to bring them all the way at the back of the garden for the clothesline and for the bins, right? So it makes sense that it should be this area. So I'm going to start at that. So if this is the door, roughly, again, my good companion is going to give me an indication more or less the width there. So at approximately maybe maximum of 2 meters, not that much, maybe 1.5, I would get a section right around the house to be a bit of a path, but not the whole area. Don't want the whole area paved. So approximately as far as here, I'd say that this could be a path and this could be an area for the bins. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hide those bins. I'm going to put some sort of a trellis or a wooden structure with a bit of a gate, okay? A gate that might open that way. And then I'll be able to put my bins here. Again, just to double check, I just go in and say, right, most bins are roughly 80 centimeters by 80 centimeters. So I'm allowing myself plenty of room there. So they're 1 meter by 1 meter squares. That means I am not cutting it short. I'm allowing plenty of room for them to open and close that gate and put them in and out. Now I'm left with that section of the garden there, and I'm just thinking it would be lovely for them to have some sort of a extendable line, one of those, the retractable line of the clothes that you can put up against the wall, okay? And then you can come out of the door and go in and put your clothes in the line there and then come back in and out, right? So that's your utility. I think you guys know I've done this before. Right, the next thing is, where do I take it from here? Now I have that line L-shaped that's going to mark a paving area. But now it would be boring, wouldn't it, if I just have a square? It would be very boring. So I don't want to just have a square. I want to add a little bit of interest. So the way sometimes I do it is by, in my mind, thinking of a particular square, and I'm just going to mark it a little bit harder, but normally I wouldn't. Normally I would make it very light, but I'm going to do it harder so that you can see what I'm thinking. So I imagine a square in my mind, and then I add another shape to that square so that it doesn't become this boring shape that everybody knows about. So what shape comes to my mind right now is the shape of a circle. So I'm going to create a circle that is interfering with that square. I'm not using a compass because I just think that the compass and the ruler or whatever kind of breaks a little bit of my thinking process. So I just did my helicopter in order to create that. So now, lo and behold, I have two shapes. They're interlocked. They could be interesting. They would give you a little bit of that formality with the straight lines, and then maybe an element of informality with the fact that that's an arch there. But I'm going to be able to erase the spaces in between so that the whole thing becomes one. Okay, so there it is. Now I have something a bit more interesting. That's why my eraser needs to be nice and it works well, because otherwise I'd be using it and it'd be breaking my heart. Now, so I stand back, I look at it and I say to myself, okay, that line doesn't exist either. I was just marking it for you to read my mind, okay, to be able to see what I have in my mind. But when I'm looking at it, I'm seeing that there's a very small, tiny little corner here. And does it actually make any sense that I have a tiny little corner, even from the point of view of paving it? So I'm going to be paving that for what? There's no actual reason for that to be there at all. So now this is where the second part of my thinking process comes in the sketching process. I could either extend that line so that it becomes a bit nicer. However, if I do that, I'm just taking almost the total width of the garden on paving material and not allowing to have too much space there for planting material. So I could either do that, or I could make this circle a bit smaller, or I could perhaps bring that line right at the edge of my circle, and then instead of closing it here with the continuation of that line, I might actually bring it further down. So why not? Again, just to bring a little bit of interest, so that the space becomes useful. So at that point I could bring it as far as here and then suddenly maybe create a line. Right, so with that in mind, I would be wondering now, I have a kind of that section there. Does it make any sense that I have this crossroads there? Not really. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna correct this line, and I'm gonna make it that is going to join the utility area sort of almost halfway between the house and the fence, okay, and the boundary. Why? Well, I suppose so that it doesn't become a kind of impractical. So as I do a line here, I can now in fact have a bit more room to move, to go and collect the clothes and whatever not, and that line now coincides with where I have my wooden trellis to hide the bins. So that becomes now a nice excuse for putting a few plants. So I'm already thinking of balance. I don't want everything paved. That would be quite boring. So if I put plants there, would there be anything wrong with putting a few plants there on the opposite side? Even if it's just not maybe the entire section, but maybe if I was to cut a little rectangle in the patio, so not to pave it, I don't pave that area. And so then that could become another flower bed, right? So that's not too bad. And now I have a little bit more interesting section where I could potentially have my sort of tables and chairs there in that circle. Okay, table and chairs. And look, a nice little area that could be potentially perfect for my barbecue, Why not? Little barbecue there, and then plenty of room here to step in and out or whatever. And then I think, okay, so if that's already kind of beginning to create something, how do I access the rest of the garden? Because remember, they kind of wanted a path, didn't they? So how do I access the rest of the garden? Okay, so I could either come in this way, or I could come in that way. Oops, that way I can't, because there is a manhole. So if I was to create a path there, I'm going to have to deal with that. So instead, I think it's better if I go on that side. So my access to the garden is not going to be anywhere here, and the reason for that is I don't want that someone needs to move away when they're comfortably sitting and dining. I don't want them to move away. I want to be able to go to the shed without interrupting what's going on there. Okay, so that means that this is going to be the entrance to the rest of the garden. So I'm happy with that. Now, don't worry, because I'm going to do another video for another potential idea, okay? So it's not just that I'm giving the client this and only this idea. So remember my thing about zoning. That zone is already sorted, and now we have to zone the lawn area. Right, the shape is important. What shape I'm going to give that lawn? So again, thinking of formal or informal, a circle is something that suits everybody in the audience. So I'm going to try and get the essence of more or less a circle. And remember, I kind of like doing things by hand, but look, nothing stops you from actually bringing your compass if you don't have the experience for drawing a circle. By all means, bring the compass, a good one that doesn't move when you're drawing, and then you can create that circle. Why is that good? Well, it would be good because it has a little bit, it picks up a little bit from what I have in the patio, and it already makes the view of the garden a lot wider and less chubby or whatever. So the transition between here and there could potentially be low-growing plants with see-through element, nothing too bulky. And maybe towards that section you could maybe put a few plants, maybe a few plants there. But then I'm thinking, and where is the path? You know, the path needs to sort of make sense here. Will I force the path across the lawn? Would I put the path on that side? If so, that's very narrow, and that's very narrow. So at this point, I think, wow, it would be much better if I actually got that circle to be to come from one of the boundaries, whether it's this side or that side, I don't know, I'd have to decide, so that the path would fit on the opposite side. So I have two choices here. The choice is that I could maybe bring my path in this direction, but then would that be too boring? Or I could bring the path on that direction, and the question would be, are they going to be using it? Because most people don't want to go the extra mile, literally. Okay, that's an extra mile. Okay, based on the statistics that people like the easiest and most straightforward trip to the shed, I'm gonna go that way, which means I'm gonna change my circle. I'm gonna bring it further to the opposite side, and I'm gonna make it maybe slightly smaller. I want you to all realize that I haven't practiced any of this. I haven't thought anything before I started. I have not thought of anything at all. Okay, and so that this is a very, very realistic version of what happens when I'm coming up with ideas for a client. I'm gonna mark this harder just for the purpose of the video so that you can see the circle. Nothing more frustrating than not being able to see. Okay, so I'm just trying to show you where that circle would be. And now I'm going to try and create a path that brings me to the second section. But based on the fact that I have a bigger patio here and that I need a second patio on the other side, I'm going to try and bring balance. So I see that that patio there is central. So if I was to put my next patio also central, I'm going to continue to highlight that tunnel. So instead of that, I'm going to bring a similar shape of that, but on the opposite side. Okay, so somewhere around there, in this little corner, that's going to be my second patio. Somewhere around there. And in order to reflect what I've done here and mirror it, I'm going to create similar shapes that connect that little patio to my shed. Okay, so I might just maybe bring it like that and like that. Something similar. So now I need to connect those two. And what I do sometimes is just I create one line, just simply one line, and then what I will do is I'll make it double. I'm actually curving it a bit because I think a pad is lovely when it has a bit of movement. Okay, not bad. So at this point, now that I know more or less the journey it's going to take from one patio to the other patio, now I can get a double line. So it obviously needs to start from where the paved section is. So to that effect, I might actually bring it a little bit further out here. Sorry, I'm going to move my hand around. So this isn't the width of the path, I'm just kind of doing a line on the right hand side of that central. And now I'm going to do the other one on the left hand side. And it's at this point actually, just for curiosity, that I need to know what width is that path. Perfect, 1 meter. You don't want any more than 1 meter. So more or less try to make it parallel lines, even though it's curved. Well, what I mean by parallel is that the distance between here and there is the same here and there, here and there. Okay, so this is shaping up a bit. Now this is where you could maybe start using the eraser to clear out some of the lines that you've created that you don't need anymore and that they could become confusing. Okay, so that's grand. And at that point I'm kind of thinking, right, I could do with that circle being a little bit bigger, slightly bigger, because then you can hardly fit anything on that. So I'm just gonna use my ruler. Yeah, that's about 2 meters diameter, not too big, so I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger, something like 3 meter diameter, probably a little bit better. And I'm not too sure that I actually like that. Again, for me to see that, I needed to first draw something. So it's very important that you hear this part, because a lot of the times you end up looking at a blank page, not knowing what to do. And to be honest, if you keep that block, you will continue staring at it forever. So see the way I drew that without even thinking. And I did it so that I could see that it doesn't work. And now that I see it doesn't work, I can reconsider. But you know what? It did give me a little bit of a guidance how to do that path. So I don't want to bring something too complicated on that end of the garden. And I might like to bring a bit more of a kind of a smaller area. And remember, now that I'm thinking about it, that section is all shady anyway. So why not put the compost bin section there? I could maybe somehow section off an area of that corner and then nicely divided with some sort of planting material. So I could maybe just create, let me think, I need to access it. So to access it, I obviously need to have some comfortable, that I'm not walking on the ground. So I could make a line to be straight rather than L-shaped. Okay, so that could be the compost area. And now I just have a kind of a bit of a square and then my circle for another patio. And now that becomes planting. And that's the important part. Planting, the planting area, that 10%, that happens at the very, very end. Plants are the left over space after that you have done your patio, your lawn, your path. Okay, so now that I can see more or less what's happening here, I can work away and give it like a little bit of for my own visual, just so that I know what's what. I want to know what surface we're dealing with. So we're dealing with paving of some kind here. We're dealing with paving of some kind there. This is all my path, which I'm going to do a little bit kind of parallel lines, just to show you that that could perfectly be some cobble lock or something like this, and that you can see it. Okay, and now I know that that's my lawn, so that means that I could do a few blobs to represent that this could potentially be just planting material, which actually could then generate my next part of the process, which is, okay, what plants will I put in this design and why? Right, ladies and gentlemen, this is my sketch process number 1. I consider it complete, and I will carry on and do some more tomorrow with a completely different idea. I hope you enjoyed the thinking process, and I sure hope that you found it beneficial. And again, this is something that can happen over and over and over again, and each time it is different. But I hope that you learned, number 1, to write your wish list on one side. Number 2, to draw something, whatever it is. Drawing something is better than looking at a blank page. Number 3, zone the areas before you do anything, getting those percentages right. Better mathematics than me, hopefully, and then work away. So I'll do another one tomorrow.